um, Carolyn Amparan and Jim Windsor. And I'm going to start with Jim. I found this very interesting, Jim. I've known you for 30, 40 years, but I did not know all this about you. Okay, Jim spent 5 years as a military medic, and he came to Columbia in 1975 to attend UMC. He has been active in environmental issues since he arrived in 1975. He worked with Missouri Solar Energy Associates in the late 1970s. He chaired the board of directors of the County Energy Project in the early 80s. He had a radio show on KOPN called Resourcefulness. In the early 90s, he wrote the Citizen Recycler column for the Columbia Daily Tribune for almost 2 years. He started his career with the City of Columbia doing home energy audits and then moved to the rate area, helped change the declining rate structure to one that encouraged efficiency. Wouldn't that be nice? He led the negotiations for all the existing large wind and solar energy contracts. He finished his career as Assistant Director of Utilities after almost 36 years. He has an undergraduate degree in planning and a master's degree in public administration. Okay, Carolyn. Carolyn is chair of the Mid-Missouri Sierra Club Group. She participated in the Columbia Climate Action and Adaptation Task Force to write the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. For the first 2 years following the adoption of the plan, she chaired the new Columbia Climate and Environment Commission. She's been a leader in organizing the 100% by 2030 Renewable Energy Coalition, which is our topic today. She's also a climate reality leader and has taken coursework in the science of climate change. She's currently retired. That's a funny statement for Carolyn. Her prior career was in management and sales and marketing for IBM Corporation. Her education is a BS in computer science and a master's in business administration. Thank you both for being here today. And perhaps you could introduce the title of the talk because I don't have it down. Maybe it's the City of Columbia to move to 100% renewable source electricity by 2030. Thank you.
Carolyn, you have the floor.
Okay, I was going to say, we didn't say who was going first, but I assumed I probably would to put the proposal out there. So, all right, let me share my screen. Okay, so I hope everyone can see the slide sharing.
Yep,
so
we see it. Thank you.
Great. So, so wanted to just briefly go through the proposal, some of the aspects of the proposal that the coalition is making to get to 100% renewable energy for Columbia, Columbia Water and Light specifically by 2030, and what the implications and considerations are. I also wanted to mention on this first slide that I am representing a coalition today that involves Mid-Missouri Peaceworks, League of Women Voters, Sierra Club Mid-Missouri, Renew Missouri, Climate Leaders at Mizzou, and a lot of other concerned citizens. So what I'm going to cover briefly are our energy goals, why we feel we need to achieve 100% by 2030, why we believe this goal is attainable and how we can do it, some of the considerations and implications and how you can help. And then, of course, after Jim talks, I think we'll have a Q&A. So I wanted to emphasize that this goal, specifically regarding renewable energy and getting to 100%, is really one of 3 simultaneous goals that need to happen in order to achieve Columbia's emissions reduction targets. So a lot of people think we're proposing this in isolation, but we're really proposing the shift to 100% renewable energy by 2030, simultaneously with increasing energy efficiency for both old and new infrastructure and promoting energy conservation. And Jim and I recently did work together to try, under the category of energy conservation, to try and keep the rate structure more focused on energy conservation than the new rates that went into effect in July were, and also to protect the low and moderate income households that use electricity at low to average usage levels. So this is definitely an area we agree on. I think we also probably agree on the need to promote more energy efficiency. And some of the ways that we can do that are by moving forward with the latest energy conservation building codes for new construction, both residential and commercial. The city is also still working on a minimum energy efficiency standard for rental housing, which is very important because over half the housing in Columbia, housing units are rental units. And then we also need to continue offering incentives for energy efficiency improvements, which we have award-winning programs at Columbia Water and Light now, but we need to keep pushing the envelope on that. And we also need to make sure that our incentives for adding energy efficiency to people's homes and businesses are able to be leveraged by low and moderate income households, because a lot of them now require an upfront capital investment that is probably out of reach. So those are super important to all happen simultaneously while we also drive the shift to renewable energy. So specifically, our proposal is that we add enough renewable energy to the Midwestern grid, called MISO grid for short, to meet 100% electricity demand of Columbia Water and Light customers. So that would mean, you know, the number of kilowatt hours that we all collectively use. It would be good to have some battery storage be added to the grid as part of this process, potentially local battery storage, because that would help with resilience. Keep also, well, a lot of times when we say 100%, people think that means we're going to, you know, shut down all the existing plants. We definitely recommend keeping the Columbia Energy Center and the municipal power plant gas resources available for peaking and backup. And this actually probably would be required by grid operations anyway, but I just want to make it clear that those would still be available for peaking and backup. And even though we had potentially added enough renewable energy to the grid to supply an equivalent amount of power as what our customers of Columbia Water and Light actually use. Then this approach also would require that if we have excess energy from whatever source, that would be sold on the open market. And that is something that both the consultants, Siemens and the Energy Authority who worked on this project have believed is something that is definitely feasible. So then on the next page, I just wanted to talk about the difference between the Climate Action Plan action item, which is to achieve 100% clean renewable energy for Columbia Water and Light by 2035, and the date of 2030. And one of the reasons for this change is about the time that the Climate Action Plan was being created was just before the United Nations came out with revised guidance on what was happening with climate change, how it's happening more quickly than what we anticipated, and how we needed to make more, as a global community, needed to make more drastic emissions reductions by 2030 to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. So the Climate Action Plan was adopted in June 2019. So this is something that we've been talking about and working towards for over 4 years now, but we still haven't, you know, gotten an ordinance change on the books. The Climate and Environment Commission, the Columbia Climate and Environment Commission, does recommend that we change the target to 2030, and that is based upon the recommendations from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for urgent action. And another important point is it's really impossible for us to meet our community greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals without aggressive conversion of Columbia Water and Light energy production by 2035. Right now, Columbia Water and Light accounts for over 40% of the emissions in our community. So it's really important that, you know, that we have this, this part of the puzzle is going to have to be a big piece of it if we're going to make our 2035 goals. Okay. So next up, I want to just talk about how we can achieve this goal. So the city has done multiple plans and studies. In addition, of course, to the CAP, that is a plan that calls for us to, make these changes. Columbia Water and Light does a renewable energy plan every year. And at the most recent plan, the 2023 plan, they had indicated that they did have plans for 49% renewables by 2028. And now that does depend upon signing new power purchase agreements. It also depends upon the Grain Belt Express, which has been many times delayed, actually coming into fruition. And one of those contracts, unfortunately, did fall through, but the Grain Belt Express does seem to be moving forward finally. I had another plan, which was the Integrated Electric Resource and Master Plan, which was unfortunately delayed in completion by the pandemic. It was delivered in August of 2021. And that plan did include a study of trying to get to 100% by 2030. And that plan did show that, it is technologically and financially feasible. Now, that plan was deemed to be somewhat out of date by the time it was delivered in terms of the cost forecast. So the city council decided that they wanted to get an updated cost forecast, and they used, the utility used a company called the Energy Authority, who delivered updated numbers of this study in July of 2023. And that updated report forecasts 5 different scenarios for reaching 100% by 2030, and then looked at the cost all the way out through 2043. And again, this report shows that it is both technologically and financially feasible. So just to talk about the most recent report, the summary of the 5 cost comparisons, and I'm not going to go into this in detail due to time, but the base case is, of course, looking at status quo, which is we have some renewable energy and we have a lot of natural gas and coal energy still in our mix. The alternative case is the one that the coalition has been focusing on, alternate case 1, which would say that we move forward to getting 100% renewable energy by 2030. We are not forcing any retirement of any of our coal or natural gas resources in that process. So what are the impacts on rates? Obviously, that's top of mind. We should be thinking about a lot, putting an equal emphasis on the impact on emissions and what that's going to do for our planet. But what are the impact on rates? So the cost of electricity is about half of the total utility cost. And so meaning that the cost that we would pay for renewable energy or coal energy or gas energy, that's only half of what the total utility costs are, because they also have all these other costs related to transmission lines and other factors. All the people to fix it when something breaks, all that type of thing. So when we're talking about the part of the pie that this is going to influence, it's going to influence half of the pie, which is the energy cost. Another big factor in impact on the rates is the timing of the investments. So, if you put them all in one year, then obviously that, is going to have a bigger impact than if they're somewhat spread out. And because it takes so long to get new solar farms and new wind farms built, we have to plan now, which is mostly estimated to be 3 to 4 years. We have to plan now to add this new solar and wind capacity to our supply. And so we can't keep delaying on a decision like this. We need to, decide, and we need to start working forward with a plan. Another really important point is that all power purchase agreements and all rate increases must first be approved by the City Council. And so this gives the City Council the opportunity to apply the brakes if needed. So even if this is passed through ordinance, the City Council would still be able to say, with each power purchase agreement, this makes financial sense for us, or this is for whatever reason, market conditions, that perhaps this contract is too expensive. And so I think that's really important for people to recognize that the city council would have the opportunity to apply the brakes. Additionally, this year, for example, we did not make the commitment that we have in the current ordinance, which said, that we were supposed to achieve, I think is 25% by this year. Right now, we're only around 18%. One reason for that is a contract that the city was expecting for a solar farm fell through. But in general, and they put out a request for a proposal for replacement contracts, but the utility felt that those were too expensive. So right now we're missing our ordinance target. So I just want to share that from the perspective that even if we pass this goal as a goal, it isn't something that, it forces us to do unrealistic things in terms of, financial obligations. So, but it's very important that we set a goal, because if you don't set a goal and you don't start working towards it, you obviously are never going to make it. So that's one is a really important aspect of this. So talking specifically about rates as it comes to the alternate case one that was in the the Energy Authority scenario, the Energy Authority estimates that it would require $170 million additional dollars over the 16-year time period, and that $170 million is in 2023 dollars. As we all know, when you're looking at a 16 or 20-year time period, inflation can have a major impact on this, and so it's always important to think about, what time frame or what type of dollars are you talking about. So they did the work to bring that back into current dollars, and so that total cost is $170 million more dollars in order to be 100% renewable energy and be making our share of contribution to stopping the suffering that comes from, the impacts of climate change. The utility staff then took those numbers that the Energy Authority came up with and tried to assign to determine what the rate impact potentially would be based on the timing of the investments, the projected cost for solar and wind energy, and capacity. And of course, this is all just projections. The utility doesn't have to do it exactly the way that the Energy Authority proposed. Also, prices, can shift up or down between now and then. But right now, based upon these numbers, it would be, they think that they would need additional revenues of 5.5% in 2028 and 5% in 2029. And then it falls to 2.5% or less each year after 2029. And again, as I said before, that's timing is really dependent upon investments. So right now, our renewable energy ordinance calls for a 3% cap on the difference between fossil fuel energy cost and renewable energy cost. As part of moving forward with this ordinance, we would either need to change that cap to a higher percentage, or we would need to just eliminate it and then, manage it appropriately in order to move forward with this goal and implement renewable energy by 2030. The other thing I wanted to mention about the TEA analysis is that it doesn't include any benefits from the $400 billion in federal funding opportunities that are available over the next 8 to 9 years from the federal government. So the city has an opportunity, as do the solar and wind suppliers, to apply for those federal funding opportunities to reduce the cost. And I also did want to mention, as some of you may have seen me present in December with the League of Women Voters in the library, this page is slightly updated because the city had labeled one of their slides of cost as cumulative cost. And it turns out when we used the records, Freedom of Information records request and got the underlying spreadsheets, that what they meant by cumulative cost was not like the standard definition of cumulative cost that everybody in the coalition was interpreting one way versus how apparently the city staff interpreted it. So once we saw the underlying spreadsheets, we realized that the costs were different than what we thought they were based on the initial presentation. So I just wanted to mention that that's why this line looks different. These 5% numbers, that stays the same, but the total cost, we're representing that in a different way. Okay, so just moving right along here so I don't take up too much time. One of the key questions about this scenario is, how will this impact reliability in our 24/7 operation? Well, the truth is that Columbia gets almost all of its energy from the grid today, the grid being what is also called MISO, and that is really all of the power plants and all of the sources of energy and all of the transmission and distribution lines across all the Midwest region that is designated as part of our MISO grid. And that reliability is a function of that entire system. And today we get our electricity from that system. We have very small amount of actual production here in Boone County. And it's important to understand from an engineering perspective that these grids can be designed to include diverse and sufficient sources to meet demand. So today, Germany already gets nearly half of their country's electricity from renewable, and their grid is one of the most reliable in the world. And that's only one of many examples. Australia also has a grid that has been running for days on end with just renewable energy. So there's, a lot of work being done in this area. There's a lot of people that are trend setting way earlier than us. Another reason why this is possible is that as we all probably recognize, weather forecasting is much more accurate today than it used to be. Now you can check on your phone and see hour by hour weather forecasts that are actually right. And because of that, this makes it much more predictable when the utilities will be able to get output from the renewables that are part of their operation. And so since 2016, the grid operator has been using wind and solar forecasts in their operations. Also, as I said, these variations are predictable because they know when the wind's going to increase or when it's going to die, or of course, when the sun's going to set. And so those variations can be backed up by other renewables also, and one of those, of course, would be battery storage. And of course, at this time, they're still backed up by fossil fuel resources. And I also wanted to mention that no matter what Columbia does, the MISO grid is transforming. I was reading a report from MISO, and they expect that 30% of their annual energy will be coming from wind and solar within 5 years. So, that is by about 2027, 2028, and they expect renewable energy to continue to grow thereafter. So it doesn't really matter what we do, our grid is going to be transforming. Some other features that help with this 24/7 resilience are wind energy is produced at night as well as during the day, depending on the weather conditions, and that really helps to balance solar production. Another point that is good to know is that having local or on-site renewables actually can improve our resilience, because most of the power failures that occur are because of transmission lines going down, not because of the failure of the energy source. And so having local microgrids can actually improve our resilience because we would reduce our need for transmission lines. Storage options are also increasing and the costs are decreasing. Hawaii just replaced its last coal-fired power plant with an equal amount of 185 megawatts of energy that's dispatchable from battery storage, meaning that they can, deliver it to the grid when it's needed. And California actually uses 7.6% of their grid is based on batteries. I did mention already that we propose keeping the Columbia Energy Center and at least one of the generators in the power plant available for capacity and backup to the grid as part of this proposal. Another point that people make is what happens, when the power plants don't close. Because we cannot close the 3 existing power plants we have contracts with by ourselves. We're not the only users, and unfortunately our contracts that Columbia has are for the life of the power plants. There's a lot of other forces that are impacting those power plants, which will help them hopefully close sooner versus later. But for now, they would remain open. And so what happens with the way the grid works and why this could still be a viable operation and reduce greenhouse gas emissions overall is the more renewable energy that Columbia buys and puts into the grid, the more renewable energy the grid operators are going to use, because the cost of the renewable energy is less than the cost of fossil fuel energy. The grid operator chooses the lowest cost energy every few minutes to add to the grid. So that means that they'll be dispatching the renewable energy and saying, run this, run that. And they'll be telling those, fossil fuel resources to, stand by, because those will cost more. I wanted on this slide I put this in here just to acknowledge that, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. And that, of course, is always the case, but, maybe a little bit more so right now in this time period of major transformation. There's a lot of factors that can influence this decision favorably or unfavorably. Some of the things that are favorably influencing right now are that, we have government policies and government funding that are going to be supporting the transition to renewable energy, and a significant billions of dollars to support grid transformation. We have some of the other states are passing laws that would affect our coal-fired power plant in Illinois about closing it sooner versus later. The EPA is, regulating air pollution, which is also increasing costs for coal-fired power plants. So there's a lot of things going on that would improve our picture for this scenario between now and 2030. Unfavorable scenarios are, right now there are delays with adding renewable energy to the grid. We've all experienced the political hurdles and roadblocks that are created by fossil fuel loyalists and climate change deniers. And there could be market conditions, of course, that increase the renewable energy costs. We're not the only city that's considering this. A lot of cities have already made commitments to 100% renewable energy of varying dates, and some cities are actually already there. And again, these cities depend upon the grid in order to make that possible. I just wanted to mention a few ways that you can help. You can contact your city council member and the mayor with your support for this proposal. And also, in addition to this proposal, we want to encourage them to ask the city staff to invest the resources to apply for these federal funding opportunities. We have a full written proposal if you want to read more detail that's available at this bit.ly 100 by 2030 CWL proposal. Organizations can support with a sign-on letter, and that's something Muleskinners haven't done yet. So I hope you'll consider to do that. And then personally, of course, you can implement your own energy efficiency improvements. As I mentioned before, the Columbia Water and Light, if you're a customer, has a lot of programs for residential and commercial that I'd recommend you look at and take advantage of. You can also install solar on your home or business, and you can sign up for the Columbia Water and Light's new community solar program. So with that, I will turn it back over to Alice. Maybe
Actually, I think we need to go ahead, Al.
She introduced him.
Yeah. Jim, do you have some comments or a response?
Oh, sure. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. Let's see. Can you see that?
Nope, not yet.
All right. Well, let me try again. How about that?
It's starting. There it is. Yep.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Let me. Oh. Okay. I want to take just a moment to let everybody know that 120 years ago this month, the citizens of Columbia voted to purchase the water and electric utility from a private company, thereby creating a municipal utility. We are one of over 2,000 municipal utilities nationally. Our utility has over 52,000 customers and ranks in the mid-60s nationally and is the third largest in Missouri. While we do have to follow some federal regulations, most major decisions are made by the city council. And so we are lucky in the sense that we have local control of our utility. So do you favor 100% renewables by 2030? It seems like a very simple question, but I really believe it is financially dangerous. Do we mean that all of the electricity we use comes from renewables? Some countries, like Iceland, for example, essentially get all of their power from renewables. They happen to have abundant sources of geothermal and hydroelectric, which can respond to the various usage that occurs. Unfortunately, in the Midwest, what we have are intermittent resources, wind and solar. Wind, well, you get power when the wind blows and the sun shines. And even when the sun is out during the day, if there are large amounts of clouds, then the production is significantly, in some cases, eliminated. This slide shows a peak day in 2008, the wind energy production, 2018, I'm sorry. I just haven't updated it. I taught a class for OSHR, and I had made that a couple of years ago. In 21, Truman Solar, which actually follows the sun because it tilts to the east in the morning and then it tilts to the west in the afternoon. Because of the cloud cover on that peak day, production was severely limited in the afternoon, and actually the peak occurred at 5, where it was about 40% of total production, and the next hour it was producing nothing. Regarding batteries, and Carolyn mentioned Hawaii, batteries, the current technology, if you have to use it as the and make it put the full output that it can, today's technology is in the 2 to 4 hour period. Then it's gone. There is no more power available, and those batteries have to be recharged. In the case of Hawaii, if they had to discharge those batteries at the full level, they would only last 3 hours, and then there would be nothing left. So while they say they are replacing the coal plant, it's not, and I'm not a coal I'm not a, how did Carolyn say it, a fossil fuel loyalist. I'm a realist, and unfortunately, right now we don't just use power when the sun shines and the wind blows. So we're stuck with that reality. So what it really means, the 100% by 2030, is that we will contract for enough intermittent renewable energy to match the total annual requirement for Columbia's electric utility. We would continue to use non-renewable energy, but we can act like we are 100% renewable. And I have sat in the room with Iberdrola and NextEra, and for a time they were trading which one was the largest renewable producer in the world. And they don't really care what Columbia, Missouri does. They are getting either production tax credits or capital tax credits to build these things. And then they run them as merchant plants, and they sell into the grid. Whether or not we do anything really doesn't matter to these corporations. They're going to build based on their overall financial plans. But one of the issues well, I believe it's the biggest issue, is that nobody has talked about the fact that that 3% cap was already exceeded substantially in 2022. I spent an hour at a water and light, I went to a water and light board meeting the week before last, and they talked about this issue for an hour. They did not mention the fact that the 3% cap was exceeded by 60% in 2022, and it was almost exceeded the prior year. And we already have the contract with when the Greenbelt transmission line is completed, we already have a 35 megawatt contract in place, and we will start bringing power in. Staff wants to add 18 megawatts so that they can reach that 30% level that is currently in the ordinance. In addition to that, in order to get to 100%, we'd have to, because it's about 1.2 million megawatt hours a year that the system uses. We'd have to contract for another 800,000 megawatt hours. And it is, you know, we don't even know what the financial impact of that existing contract is going to be. And yes, people are talking about, well, let's get rid of that 3%. Well, as Carolyn mentioned, we worked on the thing about the bad rate design that hurts low income people. That 3% is really protecting them. And if we take it away and we add, well, we're going to increase another 10% so we can buy this power that we don't really need, but we can say we're 100% renewable. The low income people are already having trouble paying, and even moderately incomed. So we really need to think about what are we doing related to that. So as far as the market is concerned, it is a very complex situation. And MISO stands for Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. It used to be called Midwest, but they changed the name a few years ago when they moved down into the South Central area. The market, and I would be glad to come sometime and just discuss the market because it's a very complex thing. I was in charge of the financial health of the utility when we entered MISO, which was in 2005. I spent several times near Indianapolis, where their headquarters is, learning about all of this stuff. And it's not just a simple matter of buying power and selling. There are many issues that go into this. And while you can make educated guesses about what's going to happen in the future, if you tie yourself to a contract, you are at the whim of what happens. And those contracts are outside the market. We have to pay those contracts based on what they say. Then we sell that energy into the market. And that's true of the fossil fuel contracts also. And but we have to pay the company like NextEra. We have to pay them for what we said we were going to take. We then sell energy into the market. The problem with wind in particular is that oftentimes there's no load there and the transmission lines are inadequate, and MISO is building more transmission lines. But even TEA, the Energy Authority, indicated that the prices over the next several years are going to be much higher because the transmission lines are not adequate. And for us to enter into contracts now, which are often 20, 25, 30 years, we would put the utility at significant financial risk and have to pay that money. 800,000 megawatt hours, we're going to contract in the $30 to $40 per megawatt hour level. So you're talking about $24 to $32 million additional money per year. And then you're hoping that you can sell it. And unfortunately, the wind production is highest in the non-summer months and often at night when the prices in the market are the lowest. So it would be a financial advisor telling you to buy high and sell low, because that's really the situation we would be getting ourselves into, from what I understand of the market. And it's just a dangerous thing to do. And as far as reliability and what the market calls on, the market is not interested in the lowest cost. They're interested in reliability of the system. So they call on units as they need them. And they will often send price signals that say, don't run anymore, and they'll send a negative price point. And for our wind contracts, we had done an analysis to determine where should we set that price point that where we could still get a significant amount of wind energy, and we don't have to pay the next era. Well, the way the contracts are written, if you tell the next era to close down, you still have to pay them for what was not produced. And so what is that price point? And we had it set at about a negative $20, which means we were paying the market to take the energy. But it worked out because we were paying next era a certain price and we were getting the renewable energy. We would be getting ourselves into the same kind of situation. And this grain belt, when it is done, it is 5 times more power is going to be dropped in Missouri than was originally determined to be, was originally planned. How that point is going to react, we don't know yet. And we really, I believe, have to wait until that happens before we contract for more, or we put ourselves at significant financial risk. And so we're continued to do what basically is an old paradigm of just buying more. And it doesn't matter whether it's fossil fuel or it's renewables, we're buying more and we're buying more. And I'm glad to see that Carolyn's talking about energy efficiency and conservation, because I believe that's where we need to really focus our efforts. Instead, really the Chamber of Commerce should be leading the charge on energy efficiency, because it creates jobs, it reduces the amount of money leaving the local community, it gives customers more disposable income, and it has a real impact on climate change, because you're reducing how much is being used. And really we do have because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we have a rare opportunity to really push forward on what can be done and reduce how much people are using. I used to do analysis on the home performance with Energy Star programs for the utility. And it was not uncommon for people to reduce their usage 20%, 30% or more from what they, by adding insulation and doing some air tightening and replacing their HVAC system. That's where the real opportunity, and that's where a real impact can be made if we really push that. In addition, and really this is all about, where are we as a municipal utility, as citizen owners, where do we want to invest our money going forward? The climate, it's the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And Columbia's utility is really kind of stuck in the 20th century. We have major critical infrastructure improvements that have not been made. smart meters, which if any of you are on Boone Electric or have have friends or relatives that live with a co-op, the co-ops have had smart meters for years, and you have other opportunities for rate design that can better send the economic message to conserve during peak times. You can get the meter can tell the utility as soon as a power outage occurs. You don't even have to call. So you can see what your usage is and how it spikes and changes. So these are things that we need to have going forward. Also, Columbia's system has overloaded substations and circuits that really, we need to make that investment. And we also have to have a better educational program for our customers to understand where we are as far as energy usage and what can we do that really has a long-term impact. So, it sounds good to have a 100% renewables, but unfortunately, I think it is the financial impact on the utility is not worth the risk. And if we can, I would think we should have a real 5-year plan that moves us. How do we implement the smart meters? How do we get more participation to reduce usage? And then as we can watch what opportunities we have and what financial impact have occurred to the utility when this other contract comes in, and we pick things that are more appropriate, and we ensure that we are not impacting particularly low-income people negatively. So appreciate your listening, and I will certainly answer any questions or if I need to clarify anything, I'll be glad to do that.
Then let's open it up for questions and comments. I guess one question I have is that I didn't understand what the 3% cap was about. Jim?
In 2004, when the Citizens Initiative came forward, initially it had a stage process to get to 15% renewables, but with the utility should not exceed 3% more than would not require a rate increase 3% more than what would have been required with with fossil fuels. And so that council subsequently has increased the amounts where it's now the maximum is 30%, but they did not eliminate the 3% cap. Now, obviously, as Carolyn mentioned, there's been years where the utility did not achieve whatever the percentage was. There is nothing in the ordinance that is punitive to the utility. And then obviously in 22, they substantially went beyond the 3% cap. Once again, there's nothing punitive in the ordinance. It's just a guidepost, I guess. This is what you should achieve, and you should try to keep it at this level.
And just to add on to that, the reason, it's my understanding from the Renewable Energy Report that one of the reasons that we had that excess cost in the last year or so was because of bad weather, which was one of the impacts from climate change, taking transmission lines down related to one of the wind energy farms. So you know, wasn't just that the cost of wind energy itself was a problem. It was actually a climate change impact, possibly producing bad weather that caused a transmission problem.
More questions? Marie?
Yeah, in listening to both of these presentations, I'm it seems like we're presenting alternatives, energy conservation, which I firmly believe in, and also a transition to renewable energy for our entire system. And I guess my question is, it almost sounded like those were opposing viewpoints, whereas it seems to me that we need to do both.
Yeah, no,
And-
I agree. In my presentation, I said that we need to do both. So.
Right. But my question is then how, it seems to me that if we get hung up on the impact on ratepayers, we're almost assuming that the impact on ratepayers is out of our hands, whereas to me, that's something that the city can design and assure that if we're concerned, which I certainly am, about low-income users of the system, can we not design rate structures that don't advantage large users, or that, like Christine suggested in the chat, even that there could be different solutions for that would not obviate the need to go completely renewable.
Yes, Jim and I actually both worked as part of the Fair Rates Coalition to try and fight the rate increase that went in place July 1st, not because we didn't think that we needed a rate increase, but because of the way it was structured. It was taking away the energy conservation's incentives, and it, you know, put more burden on low usage users, which could include low income and moderate income households. So it's very possible to design the rates going forward, and that is something that I will definitely be working with Jim on to try and reverse ultimately what was done in this year, but it's not something that, you know, the city council is going to be willing to take up immediately. So, but if we go forward with this proposal on renewable energy, it just makes it even, you know, more important that we get the rates supporting the overall policy. So,
I would add, ultimately, the issue is what money needs to be spent. And there are a lot of things that money needs to be spent on. As I mentioned, the infrastructure, including smart meters. We don't really need to spend money on renewables right now because these renewable projects are going to go forward regardless of what Columbia does. They have the incentives to build it, and they will act as merchant plants and put renewables into the grid, and we aren't taking the financial risks. In the meantime, we need to truly focus on energy efficiency, which we have not. We need to be having a community meeting, kind of like we did with the climate plan discussion, where we got together and, you know, we were all sitting at different tables and coming up with ideas. I have ideas on how we can improve the energy efficient programs we have. I'm sure other people have. What can we do? There's some simple things. There's stuff that we're going to get major pushback from different groups because it's going to require, like on Carolyn mentioned, rental property. In the early 80s, I was, you know, doing energy efficiency. You know, I'd go to homes and do evaluations, and I was gung-ho on, we need to do this as a community. Well, I went to the apartment owners meeting and told them we should be doing more energy efficiency for rental property. Well, I almost got thrown out of the building. So that hasn't changed. We need to find solutions, and we do have opportunities with the, the Inflation Reduction Act, but we need to have real focus on that. And ultimately, we have to have the money available to do some of these things, whether we increase rebates or whatever we do to get more rooftop solar, get more, conservation measures implemented, and to tie ourselves into long-term contracts that we will not know the ultimate financial impact until the power starts flowing on a year-to-year basis I believe is financially dangerous. And we should not be tying the utilities' hands in that way. We should be making them accountable. We should be making sure that we get some of these other programs that we want to see, but tying it up in a ordinance that says you got to be 100% renewable is just not something that is good for the utility, in my view.
We're going to have to run a little bit over because of the complexity of this issue. So if anybody needs to leave, we understand that. Time for a couple more questions. Herb?
I want to thank both of you for being here, Carolyn and Jim. I've been invested in this issue for way over half a century. And I regard both of you in various ways as buddies in the enterprise, and I thank you. I would like to call our attention to one of the things which you are particularly emphasizing, Jim, but Carolyn is also, which is how the heck do we reduce energy consumption? There's a real world out there where there's been a growth in the economies of this country since 1945, but a much, much larger growth in energy consumption. And the rate of increase in energy consumption by most studies is in the vicinity of 5 times as great as the growth in economic productivity in real terms. So each of you has highlighted this as a critical part of the 2020 project proposal. And Jim, you're taking this aside as the thing we should concentrate alone, but you're both focused on it. How exactly do we do it? We're talking about a bunch of money if we're going to do this, maybe even massive subsidies for the bottom half of the socioeconomic spectrum in order to cover their costs and so forth. How would we do it for each of you?
Well,
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. There's a range of things that we do. I mean, the city, as part of the home performance program, they basically created a rating system for homes, much like you see on appliances. So, the home performance appliance thing, requiring that on all home sales. I mean, seems like a relative simple thing to require, but there's going to be pushback from the realtors, probably, even though I think they should support it. And it would be then a normal thing, just like having air conditioning in a house, central air. You would have a rating on how well does this home perform from an energy efficiency standpoint. That is different than then moving into the rental property, although certainly when rental homes are sold, they would have to be rated also. So that's a relatively simple thing. The home loans, the loans that the utility makes to make improvements, I actually wrote the ordinance a number of years ago, because at the time we were making loans at almost 0% and we were paying bonds at 3 or 4%. And I thought, we can't do this financially. So I wrote the ordinance now that if, you know, they pay it back in a year, it's 3%. If it's 5 years, it's, well, no, it's 1%. And then if it's 5 years, it's 3%. And if it's 10 years, it's 5%. We could change that. And for instance, if there's HVAC systems, the higher the efficiency, the lower the loan rate. You know, we could do those kinds of things, but that's where I said we need to have a community discussion, much like we did with the climate plan, where we, you know, we hopefully get a bunch of people in a room and say, what's important to you? Or what do you have a view of that maybe we, you know, maybe I don't, that we can make a list of all of these things and then make sure they're pushed forward. But, you know, that's making it a community goal, because it is a municipal utility. It is ours. And we have to decide, how do we want it operated going forward?
I'll just, for my response, I'll say that one of the reasons why the coalition is advocating for, you know, moving forward with renewable energy is because it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And we have to keep in mind that that's why we have all of these objectives, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and, you know, and reduce the future impacts of climate change. And so one of the reasons for going with the renewable energy proposal is it's a decision that the city council can make on behalf of the whole community. So it involves the decision of one entity versus 100,000 people making their own decisions about, you know, what they do with their, you know, stove or their insulation or their hot water heater. So all of those things need to happen, but we all know it's much harder to get 100,000 people to do something than, you know, to think about, you know, the city council making a decision. So that's one point. And then I agree with Jim on the other points about how we move forward. There's a lot of knowledge in the marketplace already about demand management programs, as they're called. And certainly there's a lot of opportunity for Columbia to move forward, you know, learning, you know, on the experience of others that have proposed those kind of energy conservation programs, demand management programs. I mean, that's what we did with the proposal for the retail energy efficiency standards, or excuse me, rental energy efficiency standards. That started out with looking at, you know, what had been done by other cities and what was successful. So, and that work, you know, progresses, and I'm sure, as Jim said, there's going to be a battle, but so I agree that, you know, we have good programs, but we need programs that are more attainable to low and moderate income households. And we need to make sure, of course, that our programs are in sync and help us leverage everything that, you know, we have an opportunity with the federal funding right now.
Thank you. Jay, and then Alice, and then I will have a final question. Jay? Jay, are you on there?
I had to figure out which button to push to unmute myself. Thank you, Al. I also want to say I appreciate the presentations, and I don't have a question. It's simply a comment, and it has to do with the proposal. And what I really think needs to be pointed out is that in the 100% by 2030, we will have not made one dent whatsoever in the amount of emissions that the city is actually sending up in the air every year, because we will maintain and retain all of those fossil fuel plants that Carolyn pointed out about. And I think that it's somewhat similar to saying, like, if I had a gas car and I wanted to do something about the climate, and I didn't want to like send emissions up in the air, I would decide to buy an EV and cut those emissions drastically. But instead of like getting rid of that car, I decide to rent it out to somebody so that they can make the payments for me, help me pay for my EV. And it's like the atmosphere doesn't care whether that came from the car that we rented or the fossil fuel plant that we continue to operate. Those are the problems. And to me, if we could divest ourselves or eliminate those contracts that we have with the different power plants, that should be our target.
Those fossil fuel commitments that we have.
So that's my comment. I am absolutely 100% behind getting rid of the city's carbon footprint. What I am not seeing is that this is happening. Carolyn mentioned that, like, well, renewables will be cheaper, so that MISO will tell the fossil fuel plants to stand by on a minute-by-minute basis, and that's not the truth. That's not actually how it happens. MISO is in the process of trying to figure out how to deal with intermittent resources, and I can guarantee you that they will favor the plants that are going to be able to, like, run day and night and cloudy. They're going to favor those in their marketplace, and that is in development. But it will happen because they cannot tell a coal plant to stop and then start and then stop and then start. That is the absolute heart of the matter. So that's my comment. I appreciate the ability to put it out there.
Thank you. Jay's comment really covered a bit what I wanted to ask about. So let's go on to Alice and make this our final question.
This is just really brief. Thank you both for these presentations, which had different points of view. I've been trying to follow this issue. I just have one comment. In your work with the city and particularly the county, I would like to see liberating us for wind power, for more incentives to use wind power. And we have some real deniers out there, particularly that have affected what's now permissible in the county. And I find that really distressing. So if you can put in some plugs when you're dealing with the city and particularly the county, I'd really appreciate it. I think that will also hold us back in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn, Jim, and everybody who's had a question. And we'll call this part of the meeting over. Thank you very much, and stick around for any business.